Hey guys, this is another video. I'm actually uploading this one based on just some experiences that I've had recently with some believers. I think a lot of people, they have a problem trusting God, especially with the huge body of knowledge out there called science. So this one's going to be actually just about evolution. A lot of people have questions about it. A lot of people say, hey, can we trust God? The Bible teaches that God made the world in 7 days and man came on the sixth day, is what most people believe. So if it was on the sixth day, or whatever day it definitely wasn't day billions and billions, you know what I'm saying? So, of course, science teaches the Earth is 4.6 billion years old, and the universe is somewhere between 18 to 24 billion years old. Of course, God in the Bible, if you take it and you read it literally as God intended, then the world is not nearly that old, and neither is the universe. So this is going to be based on that, based on what God has revealed in His Word. Can we trust Him, or should we trust scientists? Um, Now, one of the first things is I'm not here to tell you what to believe. I'm not going to tell you to trust God and forget the science, and I'm not going to tell you to believe the science and forget God. I actually want you guys to do your own study, your own research, but I'm here to tell you exactly how God led me to the conclusion that the Earth is not as old as reported by scientists, and it's actually helped me a tremendous deal in my own, not only my Christian life, but also my academic life. Um, if you actually, if you're curious as to how people come to these conclusions, like how is the world billions of years old, like how on earth could someone possibly know that? Um, and those are the right kind of questions to be asking. God doesn't want you to be ignorant. God says that you should be ready in and out of season to give a defense for what it is that you believe. So I'm just trying to help you guys prepare to give a defense for what it is that you guys believe. And hopefully you guys do come to the conclusion that let God be found true and every man be found a liar. You guys should obviously want to trust Jesus more, who's given up everything for you, than a science teacher who is all the more willing to flunk you. You know what I'm saying? To me, it's illogical to trust someone who doesn't love you versus someone who does. Of course, we make those mistakes all the time, and truth is not really based on that. Like, let's get that straight. Like, of course, it doesn't matter how much God loves me. Um, you know what I'm saying? It doesn't matter how much what God is different. Like, I believe God never lies, and of course He doesn't lie. So whatever God reveals to you is faithful. But that doesn't change the fact that we're weak human beings. You know what I'm saying? So if a person loves me, though, on the other hand, like if a person loves me, it doesn't change the fact that what he could tell me could be a lie. So that's the difference. Is it doesn't matter. Like for God, He's not going to lie to you. Like He wants you to understand who He is and what the world is. Because again, if you look at it from Satan's perspective, this is purely Satan's perspective. If I get people to believe that that the Earth is millions and billions of years old, and that the universe is even older, then they're going to feel even more insignificant than they do now. So it's really crazy. Like, what difference can I make if I'm not just a blip? Because I already believe I'm a blip. If the Earth is 6,000 years old, well, a little under 6,000, then I'm just a blip. But if the Earth is billions of years old, then I'm not just a blip. I'm totally insignificant. I'm less than a blip. I'm nothing. And of course, also from Satan's perspective, if he gets you to believe that you come from an animal, then he's already defeated you. Uh, if I come from an animal, what purpose is there to live for God? So this is also the reason I want you guys to actually consider this, is because what Satan has people believing through modern evolution is completely dehumanizing. It takes away the joy of life, and it takes away the joy of humanity. Not only that, even the responsibility of humanity. So I just want you guys to start analyzing what it is that you believe. So this is just going to be it's going to be an introduction type thing. So when I decided to make this video, there was actually a book. It's a book of weightlifting. This is a book of weightlifting. So I like weightlifting or whatever. That has nothing to do with that. But it was on my bed when I decided to make this video. I opened it up and I was like, I want to make that video, God. But I decided to read the book of weightlifting instead of getting up and making the video. Uh, so this is really interesting because God is, for me, it's super adorable. Like even if I don't want to do God's stuff, He's like, oh, guess what? I'm gonna give you more ammunition. Instead of you finding out about weightlifting, you're gonna find out something a little bit about how you think. Like this is me personally. Like even though I don't know how I think, like because God's in control of like my thought processes and all this stuff. Like because God's molded me as a person. Uh, I didn't try to become inquisitive. You know what I'm saying? I didn't try to seek out the truth. God led me in that direction, so I don't know exactly how it happened. But this is God revealing to me exactly what it is that me as a Christian, because I was a Christian for I think 3 months before evolution became a problem. And I was actually scared to look into evolution. I'll be 100% honest. I was terrified. I was like, well, if the scientists know that the Earth is billions of years old, and you don't say that, then I'm really scared, God. But I told him, I was like, man, I'm gonna trust you. I'm gonna trust you and look into this, and whatever's true is true, is what I told him. You know what I'm saying? Like fully willing to take an honest look at evolution, which something I don't think many people do. So even as Christians, like I don't want you guys to be Christians and just completely ignore evolution, because then you're not doing what God wants you to do. How are you supposed to give a defense for what it is that you believe if you ignore evolution? Like let God be found true and every man be found a liar. You're not going to find the truth unless you seek for the truth. God says, seek and you will find, knock and it will be opened. So I want you guys to actually take an honest look at this and pray about it, talk to God about it. And I'm going to give you some good people, some awesome people that helped me on my journey later on in the video. But just think about this, guys. Pray about this. Ask God to lead you in this direction. And without further ado, I'm going to tell you exactly what it is that God showed me when I was trying to read that weightlifting book. So of course, it's about weightlifting, ignore the weightlifting part, but it has to do with context, so I'll read it to you. The great breakthroughs that have been made in weightlifting training and in all other fields of human endeavor have been made by those who were willing to question and improve upon existing knowledge. In contrast, the great blunders and follies of human history have been made by those who ignored existing knowledge. Therefore, challenging the existing body of knowledge for the sake of challenge is a serious mistake, rivaled only by accepting everything the experts in a given field have to say because they are experts. So, one of the ways that humans actually improve on the body of knowledge that exists in the world is by questioning that knowledge. And not only questioning the knowledge, but also being willing to accept the knowledge. If it's found true, then accept it. If it's not true, then reject it. That's how humans increase in any endeavor they're trying to do, is by being willing to question what it is that people are teaching. So just because a person is an expert, in other words, if I wear a lab coat, you know what I'm saying, and I tell you the earth is billions of years old, that holds no weight for me. I don't care what you're wearing. I don't care how many degrees you have. I want you to explain to me how you came to that conclusion. And it's the same way with Christianity. Like, at least atheists have this right. You know, atheists are honest. They're like, well, I'm not going to trust it just because it's in a book. Perfect. Don't trust it because it's in a book. Like, I don't want you to believe the Word of God is true because it's in a book. That's the same way telling Christians to believe that that science, or rather evolutionary theory, is correct because it's in a book. That doesn't work. You know what I'm saying? Like the Cat in the Hat is also in a book. That's a book written by Dr. Seuss. You know what I'm saying? The Cat in the Hat. And is that true? You know what I'm saying? Is there literally one like 6 foot tall cat that goes and talks to human beings and he takes them on wild adventures? You know what I'm saying? That's a book too. Is that true? No. So it's the same way with what you read in science books about evolution. They have to explain to you how it is that they came to their conclusions and what experiments that they ran in order to come to those conclusions. So the key to navigating successfully between these two potentially disastrous alternatives is to discover the basis for the beliefs that are currently held. So discovering the basis for the beliefs that are currently held and the degree of certainty that can be properly assigned to the veracity of each belief. If the beliefs can withstand careful scrutiny, their basis can be described as scientific in the broadest meaning of the term. If all the known facts support a particular theory and none contradicts it, it is appropriate to apply it until and unless contradictory evidence emerges. Until and unless contradictory evidence emerges. So now, guys, I want you to understand one clear thing in history. In history, Darwin did not know about genetics. The theory of genetics proposed by the father of genetics, which was Gregor Mendel, that theory was contemporary with the theory of evolution. So you actually have these two theories that came out at the same time. One was descent with modification, which was Darwin's theory, and the other was the theory of genetics, which in other words was inherited traits. So these two theories came out at the same time. Darwin did not have the understanding of genetics that Gregor Mendel had. In fact, Darwin was not trained as a scientist. He was not trained as a natural scientist. In fact, I'm aware of no experiments that Darwin ran, that Darwin performed on his theory. Whereas Gregor Mendel, we know that he did countless experiments and very studious and like hard experiments on pea plants. Like he gathered a bunch of pea plants, he kept breeding them, and he came to the conclusion that there was not only dominant and recessive traits, but these traits were passed down through, it's called well, he was doing sexual selection. So he was crossbreeding two different plants together, and he was seeing the result that came out. Darwin, on the other hand, his basis for the theory of evolution was based on the bones he found during his archaeological study on the SSS Beagle or whatever. So he went and he started studying science and naturalistic science, and he started looking at all these bones that he found, and he said, these are totally different creatures that exist today, so what is it that I'm looking at? And he came up with his theory that we all come from a single organism. Darwin did not know about cells, so he did not propose the theory that we all came from a single-celled organism. He just proposed a theory that over time, one particular species can transform into another particular species. So in other words, a human being can come from a gorilla, and gorillas came from other ape, or human being, actually chimpanzees. They say chimpanzees are closer to humans. All that is nonsense. Like they would have to explain to you exactly how it is they believe this. But just start analyzing it. If he did not have the idea of, if he didn't understand genetics and he didn't understand inherited traits, then Darwin could have in no way particularly understood how human beings came into existence. Because of course we know this, like farmers have been doing this for years. It's not like farmers don't plant a tomato plant and expect a fruit fly to come out. Like that's not the way genetics works. Like all body of existing knowledge supports what Gregor Mendel proposed, which was genetics. And actually, if you guys don't know, we're not under Darwinism anymore. Like Darwinism was proven false. He actually believed in like there was one thing that he believed. He said that because he didn't know about genetics, so he was looking at giraffes and he said, hey, eventually giraffes, they kept stretching their necks out longer and longer, and the ones with the longer necks, because they kept stretching them out, so it'd be like, you know, I'm a giraffe, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's pretty funny, but I'm a giraffe, right? And I need grass. I need some green thing. So instead of eating grass, I start stretching my neck out. And eventually, by stretching my neck out super long, then I'm going to pass that trait on down to my giraffe children. And they kept stretching out their necks longer. They kept stretching out their necks longer. And eventually you have the giraffe with like the, 18-foot neck. So I could have started at 6 feet. They kept stretching their neck out. And over time, it got longer and longer. That's not the way it works. We know that because bodybuilders don't have super muscular children. In other words, you're not going to have like a super buff child. Like Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he had kids, the kids didn't come out with 14-inch biceps. That's not the way it works. what you do in your life, it can have an effect on your child through something called epigenetics, but the giraffe is not going to be born with a longer neck because you stretched your neck. The same way the child of Arnold Schwarzenegger is not going to be born buff just because Arnold Schwarzenegger is buff. You see what I'm saying? So we know that that's false. Like, that's something that Charles Darwin believed. He didn't run any experiments on it, but that's something he believed and that's something he proposed. And again, there's nothing wrong with doing that. You can propose a theory in science or even in life. You can propose a theory, but then you have to then perform experiments on that theory that you proposed. So this is something Darwin was not known for. So this is, again, when we found that when the Crick's guy came up with the model of genetics and we started finding out more about genetics, is when scientists had to look at what they were already believing, which was the theory of evolution. They had to change it. It's called neo-Darwinism. And now, under neo-Darwinism, we believe that the mechanism of evolution is mutations, and natural selection is the driving force. This isn't we as a Christian. Like, as a Christian, I do not believe that. But it's we as the body of human beings. So human beings believe that natural selection is the driving force of evolution, and mutations is the mechanism by which it propagates. So in other words, if there's mutations there, natural selection is going to ensure that proper mutations or beneficial mutations, that they're able to be passed down. But if we just analyze basic theories of knowledge, so this is going to be the problems that I've seen with evolution and why I can't swallow it. So if we go back to the very beginning, like how scientists propose all of life came into existence. In the very beginning, all of life was believed to come into existence through a primordial soup. So they believed that in terrestrial Earth, way before any life came down to Earth, it was raining on Earth and there was rocks on the ground, and it rained on those rocks for millions of years, and eventually lightning kept striking this soup, and the soup became alive. They particularly believed through lightning striking this primordial soup that amino acids were able to form. So amino acids are a basic building block of proteins, and proteins are pretty much the building blocks of life. So I'm not going to lie, they did perform an experiment on that. They had, you guys can look up this experiment. I don't believe it's credible. And again, like, I'm entitled to my own opinion, but there was a lot of restrictions placed on this experiment in order to get any amino acids to form. So they did get amino acids to form. I believe most amino acids are like left-handed. They tend to go left, whereas 50% of the amino acids that they performed, the amino acids that they were able to form in the experiment, were right-handed. In other words, biologically inert. They were not able to, these amino acids were not able to function in life. But either way, you guys can look up that experiment. There are several restrictions that were placed on the experiment in order to ensure that life came about. And I don't believe that's intellectually honest. I don't believe that's intellectually, I don't believe they did that experiment with integrity, because they know that there's no restrictions based on in life. You know what I'm saying? Because one of the things that's hard is that in that beginning stage of life, and this is just based on their imagination, because there's nothing leading us to believe that there was a primordial soup in the beginning. There is no body of knowledge that exists in order for us to understand what early Earth looked like. Like, how could you know? You cannot know. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I were to tell you, I'm going to give you one specific spot in the Earth, and I want you to tell me how it looked 100 years ago. Do you think you'd be able to do it? Exactly how it looked 100 years ago. No. I mean, even now with history and with like photography, all these awesome things that we have advantages here in modern Earth, it would be nearly impossible to tell me how a spot looked. One particular spot looked 100 years ago. Much less all of Earth billions of years ago. Like, you guys have to understand, this is an assault on intellectual integrity. Like, if I'm being 100% honest, like, how on earth do you know how the earth looked billions of years ago? I would want someone to answer me that. And any answer they're going to give me is going to be just complete nonsense. Like, there's no written record. There's no photos. Like, how are you guys going to prove to me, especially skeptics? Like, skeptics get on us, get on Christians and telling them, hey, how do you guys believe Jesus was the Son of God? Jesus did all this stuff. At least there's a written record for Jesus. I mean, my God, it's called the Bible. You know what I'm saying? People experienced Jesus, and they wrote and they told us about him. But there's no written record for what it is these people believe. So they ran this experiment, and they performed a bunch of different controls. They separated out the harmful gases that were produced when lightning strikes the primordial soup. So this is just really interesting because everything in life is toxic. The sun is toxic. Without the specific things inside of plants called chloroplasts that harness the sun's energy, that is going to destroy life. Without the melanin in my skin, I'm going to die. Melanin in my skin, it actually absorbs the harmful UV radiation, and it makes sure that it doesn't mess up my skin. So this is another thing, like, you guys don't understand. Everything in life is harmful. Oxygen is harmful, but it just so happens that we're organisms that are made to take in oxygen and use it properly. You see what I'm saying? Like, it would be the same thing with force. You guys understand? Like, if force is harmful, you know what I'm saying? But force is what gets you to keep moving in life. Like, let's say I were to use 100 measures of force in order to punch somebody. We know that's destructive. But if I use 100 units of force to kick a soccer ball, then that's going to be productive for my goal. So this is just something I want you guys to think about, is if you look at the experiment and you look at all the restrictions that were placed on it, they were separating ammonia gas, they were separating oxygen, they didn't take into account UV radiation, like all these things that were not taken into account. Because again, if you don't, amino acids, they're just one small part of life. And again, that's not even the DNA. Like, you get amino acids. Normally, DNA codes, the genes in DNA code for proteins. And those proteins are chained together amino acids. So getting amino acids in no way makes the leap from life to non-life. Like, that's absolutely ridiculous. That's like me telling you you can have a car just because you have a piece of a tire. A piece of a tire is useless unless it's the whole tire and it's attached to a wheel, and that wheel is attached to a car, and there's other wheels that are also attached to the car with an engine, an internal combustion engine. Like, a piece of a tire is a piece of rubber for a tire is useless without the whole car. And it's the same way with this. Just because they were able to get amino acids, those amino acids are not life. Those amino acids are merely a tiny portion of life. And this is just basic. I'm just trying to explain to you one simple experiment that I believe was terribly conducted. And you have to already believe in evolution in order to accept that as evidence for life coming from non-life. Now, I want to be a science teacher, and I'm going to be a biology major. I've already taken the biology courses. I just want you guys to know that in biology, there's certain rules. There's certain laws of biology, theories of biology, and these are theories that have been tested, and these are theories that you can see. Like, I'm going to give you one theory of biology that actually helps me in my belief of God. So this theory of biology is the idea that life comes from life. So in other words, I cannot get a living cell to come from a non-living cell. Just like human beings, like if an animal is dead, like let's say you have a pure breeding horse, so awesome, the fastest horse on earth. Once that horse dies, there's no way you're going to get a living female horse to breed with that dead horse and produce life. That horse is dead, and it cannot produce a living offspring. So this is just a basic idea. And normally people don't apply it to like horses, like it's too broad. We already know that a dead horse cannot mate with a live horse and produce a living offspring. That's something we know already. These people apply it to the theory of cells. Like cells have to be alive in order to give life to other cells, either by mitosis or meiosis. Meiosis being sexual reproduction and mitosis being cell division. So those cells are considered alive and they split into other living cells. That's one of the foundations of biology. Life begets life. And this is perfectly in line with what Christians believe. They believe God is the source of life, so he gave life to a living world. And of course, we as human beings, we sinned and we died. So now human beings can only give physical life. I give a physical life, but since I'm destined to die, then also the physical life that I give to the others is destined to die. And that's perfectly in line with genetics. You know, I'm passing down a temporary existence, and that's what happens. Like I pass down my temporary existence, my son lives and he passes down his temporary existence. So that's perfectly in line with genetics. Like whatever you are, you pass down through genetics. And again, that's perfectly in line with Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ said he is the resurrection and the life. In other words, he has eternal life in himself, and he's able to genetically or spiritually rather, it's just a pattern. Genetics is just a pattern for what exists in God. So when Christ unites to us, he gives us spiritual life and eternal life. That eternal life that is in himself. And also in John, he says, the Father has life within himself, and he has granted me that life. And then Jesus, of course, has that life within himself, granted to him by the Father, and he grants that life to us. And we have this eternal life in ourselves, and we give that through the gospel. So it's just a repeating chain. It's a repeating chain of, I would say it's more mitosis, even though I don't believe that. I believe it's meiosis. It's the union, the spiritual union that happens with me and God, him being the male part, me being the weaker part or the female part. We unite together and we preach the gospel, and a product of that unity is a seed. And God makes sure that that seed is implanted into good soil, and he makes sure that that seed grows. Either someone else talks to them about Jesus, or they believe right away because someone has already planted that seed and I'm the waterer. However it happens, it's something that follows genetics pattern. And that's something people don't understand, that the Bible, or what the words of God, have been remarkably revealed in terms of what we know about life. We know life begets life, and that's exactly what Jesus said. Like Jesus said, life is going to beget life. He is life. He has life within himself, and he grants that life to us. And then we do the same when we preach the gospel, because that's what Jesus was doing. Jesus was giving the gospel he received from his Father, and he was giving that to the people. And we give the gospel that we've received from Jesus Christ to the world, and they receive eternal life through it. So this is just a really interesting thing. Like, this is something that Christians don't really take apart. It's like, oh snap, life does beget life. That's something Jesus says, and that's something that's true. And we can see that, you know what I'm saying? We plant a living seed. Like you get a tomato plant, and it's got a living seed in there. You plant that, and life comes from that. But we know if you cook a seed, like let's say I have some lentils. I do have lentils right now. They're legumes. You normally plant those in the ground, and they can grow into lentil plants. But if you have the seed and you cook it, you can no longer plant it because that thing is dead. It's the same way if I eat an almond. An almond, you can normally plant an almond nut in the ground, and you can that'll grow into a tree. But if you break the shell covering the nut and you eat the nut and you poop the nut out, that is not going to go into that's not going to grow into a tree. It's impossible. That thing is now dead. You've consumed the nutrients in it, and life cannot grow from that. So that's one of the basic things. Like, so now we have two basic things, like life coming from life, and we also have Darwin's theory being based on conjecture. Darwin's theory was not based on genetics. It was pretty much done in ignorance. Being 100% honest, like he did not know about genetics. He did not know about inheritance. He did not know about any of these things. Darwin basically looked at a bunch of bones in the dirt and said, these bones in the dirt must have come from these bones in the dirt because they look somewhat similar. And of course, we know that this is terrible. It's a terrible miscarriage of science. Like even if two bones look alike, we've discovered through genetics that two bones can look very, very similar, but they can come from different genes on the genome of those organisms. And they can come from different spots in those genes. So just because two things don't look alike, just because two things can look alike, it doesn't mean that they come from the same genetic source. So those are those two things. Like Darwin proposed his theory in conjecture and ignorance, and then they've had to modify the theory. And the second part is we know that life begets life, and the modern theory of evolution has life coming from non-life, which is they have yet to prove that's possible. So now we have those two things. I'm going to go to a further thing, which is mutations. Now, you guys, I believe, based on what God has made, that mutations are harmful. I believe all mutations are either harmful or benign. And the reason I specifically believe this is because wrinkles. This is perfect because you guys may not know where wrinkles come from. If you guys understand mitosis, mitosis is pretty much cloning. So if every day your cells are cloning themselves in order to maintain, in order for you to maintain alive. So that's basically what your skin cells are doing. They're creating exact copies of themselves and passing that down to the next generation of cells, which would be the new skin cells. So if you guys know about mitosis, mitosis is exact genetic copies. So if I'm creating an exact genetic copy of my skin cells every single generation, then why is it that we get wrinkles? I didn't have that wrinkle yesterday. If I created a clone of myself, why do I have that wrinkle today? And the answer is mutations. It can happen in different ways. It doesn't just have to be mutations through the sun, but that's the primary source of mutations for, I believe, wrinkles is probably going to be the sun. There's harmful radiation in the sun, and there's a reason African Americans don't wrinkle as fast as others. They have more melanin in their skin, and that melanin is going to absorb the harmful UV radiation. So they have less harmful UV radiation reaching their cells or affecting their cells, so they have less mutations in their cells. Because that harmful radiation from the sun, it's going to come down and it's going to mutate the existing genetic information in my skin cells. And that's why they say, hey, eat right, because they're telling you to get antioxidants. And what antioxidants do is they prevent free radicals, which is what the sun produces in my skin cells. Like those are free radicals, those are oxidizing agents in my skin cells. And if they're not taken care of, then it's easier for my skin to mutate. So that's where wrinkles come from. Wrinkles come from mutations. That's a harmful thing. They're corrupting the existing information that exists in my DNA, and they're making me become worse. So another thing is Down syndrome. That's a prevalent disease nowadays. 50 years ago, it wasn't as prevalent as it is today, but Down syndrome is, again, coming from mutations. It's trisomy 23, I believe. It's an extra chromosome, so it's a specific mutation. It's a replication mutation, so it's a duplication. In other words, there's more chromosomes that exist in that one spot on the genome that should be there. So these are all harmful mutations, and I want you guys to actually look at this. Like, I want you guys to think about this. Try to think of a beneficial mutation, and I guarantee you not one will come to mind. You have to actually go and search for beneficial mutations, and that's not going to work. You're gonna get several. The only ones that I'm aware of are the sickle cell anemia, which of course that's not beneficial. They've said it's beneficial because in Africa, if you have sickle cell anemia, then you cannot get malaria, because malaria cannot bind properly to your blood cells. So this is not beneficial at all. I want you guys to understand this is harmful. If you have sickle cell anemia, yeah, you won't get malaria, but you also have anemia. That's not good for you. So I want you guys to just look at this honestly, like if mutations are the way in which evolution propagates and natural selection selects with those mutations, then it's going to be harmful. And this is, of course, this is in accordance with another law of science, which is the second law of thermodynamics, that everything tends towards decay and destruction. the entropy in the universe is going to continually increase over time. So in other words, things get worse over time, is what it's telling us. There's more disorder and more chaos in the universe today than there was 100 years ago. So God wants you to understand that that's just the way this universe is. This universe is dying, and God lets us know that this universe is fading away. That's a verse in the Bible, that this universe is fading away, and we know it is. And one day it's going to completely fade away, so God can create a new heavens and a new earth. But if things in the universe are continually becoming worse, then it's the same with the genetic code. I think it's already hard enough to believe that the earth is even 5,000, 6,000 years old, because I can see the genetic mutation increase. 50 years ago, it was 1 in every 100,000 persons that had Down syndrome. You know what I'm saying? That's a very small percentage. And now it's like 1 in every 10,000 or 1 in every 1,000. I'm not sure. I have to look at the numbers. But the numbers of Down syndrome babies are increasing. In other words, mutations are winning. We're getting worse as a genetic species. But of course, you can say, hey guys, if we're getting worse, how are we living longer? We found ways to make medicine, you know what I'm saying? Like modern medicine is getting rid of all those diseases that used to kill us off when we were younger. And also modern medicine is finding ways to keep a person alive. But the quality of life is of course declining. A 60-year-old, you know what I'm saying? A 60-year-old used to still be doing farm work. And now a 60-year-old needs to take 20 pills a day in order to stay alive. This is something people don't consider. Just because you're alive, it doesn't mean that you're alive. Comparing the quality of life, the 60-year-olds that existed back then versus the 60-year-olds that existed now, or that exist now, the quality is getting very, very poor. And they've done studies. People who were born in the 80s have higher testosterone than people born in the 90s and in the 2000s. So this is just studies that they've done. They've taken random samples from people born in the 80s. They've measured their testosterone, their blood testosterone levels, and they're like, oh snap, as time goes on, men are producing less testosterone. So that's not a good thing. Like our genetic code is degrading at an alarming rate. So if I believe the earth is 6,000 years old and I see the genetic code degrading at this level, I cannot imagine it being even older than this. Even 20,000, 30,000 years, you got a world full of mutated people, a world full of people with genetic diseases and genetic disorders. So this is not good. It's not looking good for the human race. But they want you to believe that the earth is billions of years old, and I don't see the genetic code preserving itself for that long. And I also don't see, I don't see it. Like, to me, it's insane to see the degradation of the human genome and assume that we've been around for 120,000 years. And furthermore, the mutations, which they say are how evolution is passed down, those are selected against. I want you guys to understand. Remember I said Gregor Mendel came up with this idea of dominance and recessive? Dominant traits are the traits that usually help you live better. In other words, black is better than blue. We have brown eyes and blue eyes. Brown is almost always dominant to blue. And the same thing with black skin. Like if an African American gets together with a Mexican, you're going to have the African American traits take over the Hispanic traits. Of course, she's still going to look like her mom. The baby that's born or the child that's born, he or she is going to look like their mom. It's going to look like their parents, but they're going to have the predominantly African American traits because that's dominant. Black skin helps you survive better from the sun's radiation. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a reason it's dominant. The reason it's dominant is because it helps you live better. It's the same with dark eyes. Dark eyes also absorb the harmful UV radiations, and the harmful UV radiation hits my eye. The dark part of my eye absorbs that, so it doesn't get into my pupil, the harmful part. Blue eyes do not have that advantage. Blue eyes, they may be beautiful, they may be nice to look at, but blue eyes are not they're going to absorb, they're not going to absorb as much harmful UV radiation, so they're going to go blind at a faster rate than, over time, they're going to go blind at a faster rate than people with dark eyes. So this is just something that we know this. We know that dominant traits mask mutated traits. And we know this based on, if you did that research, I want to encourage you guys to look up sickle cell anemia. If you guys look up sickle cell anemia, we know that if you have one sickle cell anemia trait from your mother and one regular non-mutated trait from your father, that you're going to have good blood. Because the dominant trait is going to be the non-mutated trait. And this doesn't become a problem unless you understand evolution. If you understand evolution, then let's just be ridiculous so you guys can understand what exactly is it's going on. Based on evolution, mutations are the mechanism through which evolution propagates. So if mutations are how I get from one species to another, then that is what we're going to analyze. So let's say I have one mutation. Let's just make it simple so you guys can understand. I have a mutation with wings. My mutation gives me wings. And let's say these wings are good enough to make me fly. Of course, that's not the way it works. I don't have hollow bones. If tomorrow I were to wake up with wings, I probably wouldn't be able to fly because I don't have hollow bones. My mass is going to be too great. But either way, let's say these wings make me fly, and I have wings tomorrow or my child, let's say my child, because again, I can't wake up tomorrow with wings. If I have sex with a woman, my wife, and we have a child, that child is born with wings. Let's say that's based on one mutation. Now this child who is born with wings, when he grows up, how is he going to be able to pass down that mutated gene? Let's say he was blessed enough to get that mutated gene. If he finds a woman without wings, and of course this is what's going to happen, he's going to find a woman without wings, he's going to have sex with her, and guess what? The non-mutated genes, in other words, the gene that was mutated, it's probably not going to be passed down to his offspring because it is a mutated gene. And the body's not going to recognize it, you know what I'm saying? Like in meiosis, that mutated gene is it's gonna be probably non-disjunctioned out. Like I don't know exactly how everything is gonna work out, but I know for sure what the specific mutated gene, like let's say it's a mutated gene on, it would have to be an autosome. So it's gonna be a mutated gene on autosome 20. She's going to confer, she's gonna give a good gene from autosome 20. That's her location in her genome, and she's going to give a non-mutated gene, and let's say he does actually give the mutated part of his gene on autosome 20, because again, it's not 100% chance that he's even going to give that mutated gene, pass down that mutated gene's part. You know what I'm saying? Like there's different parts to every gene, and every gene based on meiosis is going to either pass down the parent's part or the mom's part. So let's say the mom, the mutated gene, it only happened on the mom's side of him. So when he inherited it from me, he got a perfectly good copy from me, and man, that still wouldn't work. Dude, that still wouldn't work, because if I pass down a good copy of mine and she passes down a messed up copy of hers, then he's not gonna get the wings. So actually, what would have to happen is in meiosis, on autosome 20, let's assume that's where the mutation is, she would have to mutate the exact same way that mine would mutate, and mine would actually have to mutate also in order for the wings to be passed down. And that would then be a recessive trait. Because all or most of actually it's not all, there's very few mutations that are dominant. And those that's like a Genghis Khan gene. There's a Genghis Khan gene that has to do with the collarbones, and that's a dominant mutation because of the specific way that it affects the protein that's being produced. But that's the only one, and trust me, I've looked for dominant mutations, and I cannot find very many. That's the only one that I found, and that took me like, I don't know, that took me a good solid 5 hours of looking for that specific mutation. And that's the only dominant mutation I'm aware of. But you guys have to understand, if this guy has wings, even if wings help him survive, and let's say every woman on the planet Earth wants to have sex with my son, assuming he's willing to do that, and he has children with every single woman on planet Earth, because that's a good trait, And that's how natural selection works. Natural selection works by, hey, these are good traits, these are beneficial traits, and these are going to be passed down to future generations. You guys have to understand that the overwhelming, and let's say this is the overwhelming, this is 100%. 100% of the population of my son is not going to have wings. The only way these wings will be able to be passed down is, again, if you have another freak accident where another father and another mother, their genes also mutate in the exact same way that my son's genes have mutated to confer these wings. Because again, even if she has wings, and my son has wings, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get together and have children with wings. And this is because she could have wings because of a defect on let's say autosome 19 versus 20. You see what I'm saying? And that's the rough part that you guys have to understand. Like, these genes, in order to confer these genes down, either the genetic mutation has to be dominant, which we know that most genetic mutations are not dominant, or you have to have a mutation of the same mutation. So it's a freak accident that made my son have this genetic mutation, and it's going to be another freak accident at the exact same location that makes this girl have the same genetic mutations for her to be born with wings and my son to be born with wings. So now you would have two recessive traits, and these people would have to get together, and their children would 100% have wings if this were to happen. 100% have wings. But then you guys have to understand that just because they have wings, then they would have to have sex with each other or find my offspring, my grandchildren have to have sex with each other in order to continue passing down those wings. If they decide to marry a normal person without wings, then the wing trait is going to be drowned out in the genetic pool. And that's because the overwhelming majority of people don't have that mutation. And this is what scientists, I don't know why they don't deal with this, but you guys, natural selection is not going to do that. Natural selection does not work like that. Just because something is beneficial, and I jumped from completely nonsense mutations to something that we know is beneficial. You know what I'm saying? Just to prove the point that genetics is not going to work like that, because mutations are selected against. They're not selected for. So not only do you have something happening very rarely, you also have something, it's even rarer than people imagine. So this is the reason why I don't believe mutations work, because number one, mutations are almost always harmful. Number two, mutations are selected against when two people come together in sexual intercourse. They produce children, and the dominant traits are almost always going to be the wild type. And we know this. The wild type is not going to be, you look up what wild type means. Wild type means what most people have in a genetic population. That's going to be the wild type. And the wild type is always dominant. So the wild type is not going to be the mutation. It doesn't matter how beneficial it is. The wild type is going to win out, and it's going to drown out that mutation no matter how beneficial. It's going to drown out that mutation in the first generation, bro. Like, this is what I want you guys to understand. That mutation will disappear within the first generation. And even if it survives 1 or 2 generations, it's going to eventually be drowned out by the wild type, because that is not good. You know what I'm saying? Like that. And it's not that it's not good, because again, I gave you an example where it would be good. It's just that that is not going to be dominant. And this is what you guys need to understand. If you guys look at the scrutiny, if you scrutinize the genetic, the body of knowledge that we have on genetics, you'll find that it's overwhelmingly against evolution. Now, if you guys want to go to homology and say, hey, look, these two bones look alike, so they must come from the same ancestor, I think that's nonsense science. Like, that's not, especially with what we have now. You know what I'm saying? That's like human beings looking at Earth and saying it's flat because I can look at the horizon and it looks flat to me. That's not sufficient. It's not sufficient evidence to support the idea that we all come from a common ancestor. And again, look at the experiments that have been performed by evolutionists. Do they prove that a human being can come from a monkey? Or do they prove that there's descent with modification? Again, we understand that descent with modification, it happens, but it doesn't happen the way Darwin proposed it happens. Like the peppered moth, for instance. Like, even that particular experiment, I want you guys to, like, turn your brains on. Turn your brains on because they're saying that the peppered moth, because it camouflages better, then that's why it survived. But you guys have to understand, the thing that eats moths the most are bats. Like, bats are the primary predator of the peppered moth. So I don't know what you guys are thinking when you guys accept the peppered moth theory, because it doesn't matter how that looks to a bat. Like, a bat doesn't care. A bat hunts through echolocation. So a bat doesn't care how well camouflaged a moth is, because it's going to catch that moth anyway. And on top of that, moths, they're not always on trees. Like, I don't understand. The most moths die when they get up at nighttime and they start trying to fly around and eating. Then they get hunted by the bats. So even the experiments that they performed to prove the theory of evolution, they don't hold water against close scrutiny. Because yeah, they could be well camouflaged after the Industrial Revolution. You know what I'm saying? Darker moths, they live longer. But again, that's not even an experiment. That's observation. You know what I'm saying? An experiment entails a control group. What was the control group with that experiment? That's an observation. You know what I'm saying? You have one extreme and you have another extreme. That's all that is an observation. An experiment is testing something. An experiment has to do with controls. You set up controls. You propose a hypothesis. You devise an experiment with a control, and then you change one aspect of that. I always tell people there's multiple experiments that you could perform in evolution to help me accept it. One is get a human being and a chimpanzee to mate. Now, some of the people say, oh, no, of course you can't. They've been separated for millions and thousands of years. It's like, well, wait a minute. Like, if you're trying to get me to accept the theory, what evidence do you hold? Like, what experiment do you give me in order to accept that theory? And the experiment, and of course you guys say, hey, this is stupid. No one would ever do that. But I did some research, and in California and in Florida, the University of Florida actually did the same thing. They tried to artificially inseminate an egg with a female egg with orangutan or chimpanzee. I don't remember exactly which one was which, but with basically simian, which is like gorilla type animals. Anyway, they tried to put let's just say gorilla, for example. I don't remember exactly what it was, but gorilla sperm into the egg of a human woman, and it did not work. They gave these people I believe it was $200,000 or $100,000 in order to perform this experiment with artificial insemination, and they tried it multiple times and it failed. Though they were not able to produce a zygote, and the same thing happened in California. So I want you guys to understand that it's not stupid. Like, I'm not proposing this experiment randomly. Like, this is a reasonable thing. Like, if me and chimpanzees have 99% similar DNA, which is again that's what is proposed for human beings. Human beings, between me and the girl that's going to be my wife, like between me and her, there's 99% difference within our DNA. And scientists propose the same thing, the same differences within a chimpanzee and a human. And it doesn't work. You see what I'm saying? Like, humans can interbreed, but chimpanzees and humans cannot. And that's because they don't come from the same ancestor. Me and my wife, we do. We come from the line of Adam, and we come from the line of Noah. We have the same human ancestors. But these DNAs, the DNA in them is radically different than the DNA in ours. It's so much so that they're unable to crossbreed. And that's the thing, is if you guys do enough research, you'll start seeing that the theory falls apart. Because 99% similar DNA does not mean that we come from the same author. We come from the same source, the same ancestor. The example that I'll give you is this encyclopedia uses 99% is 99% similar in its word use versus the Bible. So this encyclopedia has 99% same word use as the Bible. That's crazy. That's insane. You would think that they would come from the same author. But the thing is, if you look at the DNA code as coding for proteins, the same way, the same letters that are in this book are the same letters that are going to be in the Bible. Just the same way, if we have the same proteins, if me and a monkey have the same proteins, then the same proteins are going to be, the same genes rather in my DNA are going to be in that monkey's DNA, because it's going to be the same, it's going to be produce the same protein. But that's not the same combination, because different combination of genes, where it's found, and that all affects what's going to come out. So it's the same way with the book. Different combination of words is going to produce a different, it's going to produce a different message. So different combination of genes, even though they may be the same genes, in different orders, different sequences, they're going to produce different organisms. And that particular protein is not going to be expressed at the same location, which is very important. And again, don't get too caught up on percentages, because it just depends on how you look. Like I always say percentages are garbage. Like, you'd have to tell me exactly what genes are similar, and if they're similar, are they similar at similar locations? And it's the same way with anything, because nobody's gonna do that. Like, I talked to an atheist guy, and he said, "Well, we had our one mutation led to bigger frontal lobes, and that's why human beings are able to think more than apes." And I told him that's nonsense. He was like, "What? No, we know that. That's science." Like, I was like, "Okay, well, tell me what particular gene mutated in order to give that that advantage of having a bigger frontal lobe." Silent. You see what I'm saying? Like, I can tell you for sure that that DNA, like for Down syndrome, that comes on autosome number 21 or 23. Trisomy 23. I'm not sure. It's either 23 or 21. I can tell you for sure it comes on that. Like, we know that genetic mutation, that's where that genetic mutation occurs. But for this guy, he cannot. And further, I could grill him more. I grilled him more, you know what I'm saying? Like, because that's the thing, is what gene mutated? And specifically, what mechanism of mutation? Because there's 3 mechanisms of mutation. One is duplication, so that's like having a double. So that's like having a twin. So I have one pink gene, and then instead of just giving one, my body makes a mistake and gives me 2 pink genes, 2 pink pens. So pretend this is pink. I have now, instead of just having 1 pink pen, I have 2 pink pens. That's duplication mutation. Now the other mutation is deletion. So I have one mutated gene, right? This is my gene, and a deletion mutation means I don't have that gene. So the other one is insertion mutation. So I'm going to give you an example of insertion mutation. So this is, again, this is the normal. This is the wild type. This is what I'm supposed to have. So again, let's go over it. This is duplication. So instead of having 1, I have 2. This is deletion. Instead of having 1, I have 0. And now this is going to be insertion. Instead of having 1, I'm going to have a modified 1. I'm going to put this little, I just insert this thing wherever it goes. There you go. So this is going to be an insertion mutation where a specific amino acid is inserted where, a specific nucleotide is inserted where it's not supposed to be, and then that is replicated. So this is going to be an insertion mutation. So now I want you guys to understand one thing, is not only can I grill him further, I can also say, if it was an insertion mutation, what specific part of the genome was inserted? How did it look before? And how does it look now? I guarantee you, now this guy was an ardent atheist. He gave me a bunch of problems, but and again, he was a scoffer. Like, he did not care about God at all. He was just scoffing. And come to find out, hey, I'm sorry, guy. Like, I cannot say anything because I had never considered that. It turns out that this guy wasn't as intellectually honest as he believed he was, and he wasn't as skeptical towards the theory he was willing to swallow, evolution, versus the theory he was willing to abhor, which is Christianity. So that's the thing, is how did it mutate? Silence. And I guarantee you every person is going to give you that silence. Now let's start with missing links. I don't care where you start. Like, tell me how you get from a whale to a cow. Tell me which genes mutated and what sequence of genes would have to be there. Like, you cannot do this. Once you start breaking it apart like this, the theory is liquid. Not even liquid, dude. It's non-existent. If you guys separate it out like this, if you guys get to this point where you're like, oh snap, how much do they know? And if they know this much about genetics, because again, this is the main thing. Like everybody's going to accept genetics. Like me as a Christian, I have no problem with genetics. I understand because I've seen it. I see that I have my father's hair. You know what I'm saying? I have my father's height versus my mom's height. Like I can see this in my life that I've inherited certain traits from my parents. But we cannot see this, especially since they say this happened millions and billions of years ago. Well, that could just be the lie. That could just be the hiding part of evolution. So I want you guys to actually start considering this, because this is just one mutation. He said that one mutation led to us having bigger frontal lobes, and he could not name the mutation or the location of the mutation and which specific mutation it was. So I want you guys to understand that no scientist will be able to do this. And the reason why is because the genes are more different than they will lead you to believe. And maybe we don't have the technology to study all this in depth. Maybe we don't have the manpower to study this in depth. But I want you guys to understand that if we don't have the manpower to study these things in depth, then it is not a proven theory. So I want you guys to start looking at this thing honestly. Start looking at evolution, pray about it, and just like we started off with the weightlifting thing, if you're questioning the modern body of knowledge, and you're questioning it, and it doesn't seem to hold water, and there's multiple things that have come out to contradict it, then it should be abandoned. And I believe genetics was it's slated, bro. Like I believe it's over. Like I believe hey, when we started discovering more about genes is when evolution should have died. But instead of getting rid of their horrible theory that had nothing to do with genetics, it was based in ignorance, all they did was modify it. And they modified it with mutations. And they said mutations is how we adapt to mutations make us better adapted to the environment. But now that's not even true. Like we've discovered epigenetics. Epigenetics is actually the reason we adapt to our environment. Because we know it's not true. It's not true that over time people become better adapted to their environment, or rather populations. We know that human beings adapt to the environment instantly. In other words, if I go outside every single day on 60-degree weather and it's cold at first, it's not going to be cold a year or two from then. I'm going to get used to it. I'm going to adapt to it. And it's the same way. Like we depend on these principles of epigenetics. Pretty much the epigenetics is like the skin of our DNA. And there's information in our DNA that's not being expressed. But the DNA, like the epigenetics, is going to tell the DNA to move in a certain way in order for the genes, the better genes, to be expressed. So this just has to do with being the best version of yourself. The best version of yourself is not a 400-pound guy. You know what I'm saying? But it just so happens that the epigenetics, based on the way you're living, the epigenetics for you have you expressing those particular traits. So if you start living a different way, you start changing your lifestyle, the epigenetics will start changing the DNA that's expressed. Because again, this all has to do with the DNA. The DNA is telling your body what proteins to produce, and based on the DNA telling your body what proteins to produce, that affects your hormone, what hormones are released, and all of this has to do with fitness. Like you can become more physically fit based on your genetics if you do proper things, and we know this. Like people who train, they know, hey, I'm going to eat better, and that's going to give me more advantage on the field, and it eventually does. It's not like you eat good one day and all of a sudden you're better on the field. You continually eat good, and then your body starts expecting that. So then the skin of your DNA, called the epigenetics, it starts moving the genes that are currently being expressed for genes that would better help you to adapt. So adaptations don't come from mutations, because that's garbage. We know that Arnold Schwarzenegger was not born a bodybuilder. He adapted to that over time, and he adapted to it, not the population. So now not only is now that's in question too. So that's the whole video, guys. I just want you guys to pray about it, think about it, and goodbye.